Without knowing the historical development, it is very difficult to understand why design thinking is important. In particular, if we can understand the transformation from the Renaissance to Industrial Revolution, I think we can better see what Generation Z will encounter in the future. I want to explain a little better what I mean. What caused the Industrial Revolution? What kind of transformation has it been? Well, in order to interpret this, I especially find it useful to analyze what happened from beginning of the Renaissance. After Concert of Istanbul 1453, especially because of the Christian warfare of Islam, many scientists in the Byzantium felt compelled to leave Istanbul and suddenly found themselves in Rome, Italy. It was thought that more liberal mentality of Protestant in Europe would be the solution for breaking the Ottoman power. With the arrival of scientists feeling from Byzantine Enlightenment period, which has a libertarian model, was triggered an explosion of science production occurred. For example, discovering that water evaporated at 100 degrees, research on anatomy, discovering that the world is round, making progress in studies on human anatomy, finding the law of gravity. Well, when I say Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci's painting, as you were taught in high school, may come to mind first. However, when we look at it with today's mindset, it is extremely difficult for us to understand those times. The arts of the time didn't actually mean art in the full sense of the word. With the holistic point of view of the time, arts meant an understanding of the production of something, the manifestation of creativity, the merge of the structure. Thus, it always said that Leonardo da Vinci and his contemporaries actually taught interdisciplinary, and Da Vinci is seen as a reflection of concept of Renaissance man. Since the scientists of that period look at the science from a holistic point of view, very different innovations and view emerged that had not been seen before. The machine of Leonardo da Vinci, widely known by an historian, his anatomy drawings and the innovation he brought to art were seen as unexpected new output. In parallel, thanks to the printing press that emerged suddenly with Johannes Gutenberg in Germany in the 15th century, the scientific and artistic developments in Italy were multiplied and spread to the society. Innovation of printing press encouraged new forms of cooperation between science and the art. For example, the development in the science of anatomy are illustrated by artists and distributed to the world. With opening of the way of spread of knowledge, it suddenly caused European society to leave the scholastic view of the Middle Age and enter the period of Enlightenment. Especially the technological innovations that affect the economy have caused a socio-economic change in society. In this new period, the bourgeois class prospered. They began to buy lands from their overlords. The wealthy bourgeois class gave scientists the freedom and research space they needed. Thus, there was a transition to a new social transformation that emerged from a feudal structure. But at the same time that this transformation, which I have roughly summarized now, took place, the discoveries of new continents began. New mineral resources were found, gold, silver, diamond, etc. This Enlightenment period in Europe led to start a colonialism with discovery of these new continents, processing the new mineral resources found and sending them back to place where the resources were obtained was seen as a new trade model. It required a speed to make it happen. In those times, the search for a place that gave the opportunity to faster mechanized production began, especially since the speed of producing textile at home with looms was not enough. Those factories emerged. The first factories developed with the frame of the textile industry. It is accepted that the first factory in the world was the silk factory that Thomas Lombe opened in Derby, England in 1721. This was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So, we are talking about 300 years here. When you look at the previous transformation, it took about 1,500 years. Before that, it was much, much longer. In other words, the transformation that took place in a long year suddenly becomes shorter. This industrial transformation revealed a new awareness in people. The Industrial Revolution, on the other hand, revealed a new way of life. So, what did the Industrial Revolution trigger? A new way of life has emerged because workers now need to be relocated around the factories to work faster. A new lifestyle must be created for people who have been cut off from the large family structure and forced to work almost 24 hours a day. So they can work more. For this, so to speak, simple shelters and settlements are built for them. Professional designers are needed for this. In the 18th and 19th century, especially in England, these people lived and worked in these shelters and jobs in conditions that we can't imagine. In order to improve their quality of life, they later rise up and want more comfortable, more effective houses to be designed where they can live as a nuclear family. This is a very long and painful process. In that process, the houses with large dining and living rooms are transformed from large housing structure into structure for smaller nuclear families to live in. The basis of the way of life we live today is laid out at the end of the 19th centuries. Well, design professionalism is something that requires dictation. And this dictation still has lasting effect today. Designers still has a strong dictation identity. Such designers actually have a mission and a culture to provide the act of introducing new flower to people. On the current slide, you see the famous French designer Philippe Starck's lemon squeezer. This is not a lemon squeezer as we know it. Philippe Starck designed a brand new lemon squeezer for Alessi company. This is not a usual lemon squeezer. This is the designer's mission is not only to make user taste new taste of life, but also to provoke us, to make us think and break our heart when necessary. This lemon squeezer is actually not very functional, because when you squeeze a lemon, it is something that spreads to the environment, but it brings a difference and change in people. Alessi produced 550,000 of this product, but it is not used today. There are about 10,000 golden versions in collection alone in museums. This design by Starck is a good example of designer dictation, of course. This design culture came to the forefront between 1990 and 1933, just after the First World War, with the Bauhaus School the role of teaching the professionalizing designer dictation and lifestyle. It is still the most cliche phrase that is said to designer in old school. You will good the society. You will guide the society. So what kind of transformation is there today? When you look at the last 20 years, you will be surprised because the step in transformation from the Renaissance to the Industrial Revolution are almost the same. Surprisingly, the story is the same. What is it? Suddenly, in the 2000s, a concept called the internet entered our lives. In other words, something brand new come into our lives, such as the invention of printing press. Indeed, the internet is something that emerged in the 1960s with the ARPANET. However, after 20 years, it becomes an indispensable part of our lives. Along with this, social media platforms are emerging. It turns into something we use at least 3-4 hours a day. Maybe there is no one among us who doesn't not spend this much time a day on smartphones, except for those who don't use it, who do not use it because of opposition. Those with the spirit of personalized media, the concept of individualism gradually emerged, especially in Generation Z. Today, anyone can broadcast their own. Social media turns into a desire to share with others where everyone wants to be a star, where they go, the time they spend, and every stage of the day. Especially for the Generation Z, we are faced with a return to a more individual life from the nuclear family, but beside this, we are faced with a brand new communication platform. In a summary, we are entering brand new communication platform whose influence has been increasingly, especially since the 2000s, just as the printing press was found and brought into our lives. In addition, we encounter another reality. Bitcoins emerged in 2009 as a brand new commercial tool with no bounds, tax-free, which we do not see and whose owner we do not know. Surprisingly, in the 17th century, gold and silver began to be widely used as a means of trade in the world. In particular, the Generation Z has a tendency towards bitcoins lately. At this point, the tax suddenly disappears. How this currency will be used and taxed is still not very clear. And the governments are looking for how to take action, because it is thought that the national structure is suddenly in danger because there is no control over money circulation. We don't know if this departure is towards a tax-free life, but when these little trials, together with quantum technology and shrinking of transistor sizes, create a safer system in our lives, and we trust this system. If our trading tools will change, we're already seeing the traces of this. On the other hand, people did not care much about artificial intelligence when it was first found, which started to be developed many years ago, before 2014. We see that artificial intelligence has made a rapid development in our life since 2015, with the increase in computer speed and the emerge of supercomputer faster than we can imagine. With robotization, we see a lot of things, such as the structuring of our preferences. When we combine this development that I have described since the beginning of 2000, we are faced with a different type of communication since it is getting more widespread. Similarly, the Spanish epidemic occurs after the Industrial Revolution. With the epidemic came wars. It is an interesting coincidence that today we are faced with a similar phenomenon such as the COVID-19 epidemic, and wars are taking place in many parts of the world. Today we see that we are moving towards collaborative thinking since the dictation of designer has disappeared and there is a more collaborative environment where there is a co-production. Now I want you to make a guess. The time for the transformation from Renaissance to Industrial Revolution took about 300 years. If the change from 2000 to 2020 continues at this rate, in which years can the transition to new age happen? What do you think about? With the development of artificial intelligence, it is a question if people will be employed more and how the society and states will find a solution to this. In some studies, the possibility of giving money to employed segment of society with universal basic income model and putting the workload on machine to create a new way of life, as in Saudi Arabia, are discussed. Therefore, this transformation is not yet complete. In the document we have read, it is stated that the historical transformation is faster than previous eras and that today transformation may be completed in the 2040s and 2070s. As a result of this, it is always discussed whether we will enter a new direction period instead of making decisions with collaborative thinking, that is, design thinking, which is currently on the agenda. For example, whether large companies will create a new feudal structure. Moreover, if it is to occur, it is a matter to curiosity how this company-based feudal structure will be shaped by shared verification in the society that emerge with cryptocurrencies. My dear friends, I will very lucky because in 5-6 years I will retire and go fishing. It seems that coming years will be a little painful for you, for the generation Y. But considering the 2040s, I think there is a very painful period that Generation Z will face. There may be other new technology invention that will change our lives. Besides, there may be new epidemics. There may be more serious and scary wars. Therefore, the better the generations that adapt itself to this changing environment, the easier it will be to get rid of the chaos that will happen. Why did I tell you this? In the next 10-15 years, if we didn't adapt the collaborative thinking, that is the design thinking model, especially for the generations that if we continue with the old disciplinary logic, we may disappear. As in the Renaissance, it will be necessary to think both like engineer and artist with the discipline of arts, that is collaborative thinking. Now, I want to say something about more how design thinking get here from its inception. And that's it. Liz Sanders, you see on the slide right now. Liz Sanders noticed this transformation long before the 2000s. She predicted that it's very necessary to do something collaborative or the American economy would lose its lead. Therefore, she looked for a model for herself and started to research where it could be found. Because everything in the world is thought out. For example, what do you think? In what year do you think the history or cinema emerged? Yes, we know it's end of the 19th century, almost equivalent to the Industrial Revolution. But 5-6 years ago, in a find found in a cave near Paris, there are animal figures overlap on each other, and it is seen that they become animated as torch goes back and forth. Thus, all the memorization of the history of cinema are broken. In other words, everything has been considered as for a human history, as you see. For example, virtual reality technology was convinced by artists of the period in the pastoral era. As technology advances, this idea appears in other and richer dimension. So as Lysander explores on the assumption that this has already been considered, she noticed the structure in the Nordic countries. In the 1950s, there was a collective and cooperative way of life in the Nordic countries. Why in Nordic countries? Because the Nordic countries are difficult to place climatically. Lysander takes this model and brings it to the United States. The name of this approach in Nordic countries is participatory design. She brings it to United States and revises it in the context of United States and calls in co-design. First, Xerox, then Apple adapt this approach. Apple's first mouse is revealed on the model put by Lysanders. You know, Apple has always been a leader. They created the product of iPhone, the current version of the first smartphone. After that, brands like Samsung followed suit. What happened? Today, Apple has turned into the company with a stock market value of $1 trillion. Why is that you should perceive the new logic process by taking lessons accordingly, so that the generations that can go through this process unharmed? Therefore, when you grasp the logic that breaks your heart, has a collective thinking, produce ideas, and can say whether it is okay, or if it is okay, we can't know when you graduate. Look, what we've been going through for the last 2 years. We don't know what we are going to experience in the next 2 years. The next 5-6 years will be even more turbulent, but I don't know in what direction. But when we take our guard accordingly, it is possible that especially the generations that will come out with a big profit. That's why we are going to break our minds.